right, we should now be recording. We have 2:30. Should we maybe get started? I could cover a few things really quickly. I just want to say thank you everyone for joining. Everyone is muted upon entry. Feel free to use the chat function. These messages can be seen by everybody, or you could send them privately to a specific person on the attendee list. If you have questions, you can also use the chat function. Our team will go through those if time is permitted at the end. This will be recorded and available for everyone to view later, as long as you have a ticket. And if you have a request for our staff, please contact them at rczoom@recyclecolorado.org, or you can call them at 720-839-9531. And now I would like to welcome everyone to our virtual session, Tap into Grant Funding. I'm Allie Palmer. I am co-champion for this session. I sit as board president for Clean Valley Recycling. I'm also a member of the board of directors for Recycle Colorado. In the following session, we will learn how to find, apply, and write grant proposals. We will start with an overview of waste diversion grants available from the EPA and the CDPHE, followed by how to write a grant proposal and the best way to do that. After that, we will break out into groups and brainstorm possible projects that can be grant funded. And now I'd like to turn it over to our other co-champion, Emily, to introduce herself. So take it away, Emily.
Awesome. Thank you, Allie. Hello, everyone. My name is Emily Wilson, formerly CAPS. I work with the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment. And like Allie, I'm also on the Recycle Colorado Board of Directors and have helped co-champion this session. We have a really awesome lineup of presenters today. And like Allie said, her and I will be kind of handling all the technical back-end stuff. And so with that brief intro, I'm going to go and hand it over to our wonderful facilitator, Ann Peters. I'm sure most of you know, but Ann is the president of Gracestone, Inc., a national consultancy. And she has over 40 years of experience in the recycling industry. So we are so lucky to have her here today moderating this session. And so with that, Ann, I'll just turn it over to you.
Great, thank you. Thank you, champions. You guys are great. So if you could put the slide on the agenda, let's just take a look at what we're covering today. Well, actually, first we'll do the people. Let's go back to people. Melissa Payan from EPA is going to talk about what EPA has on offer, which is pretty terrific. And then from the Colorado Department of Public Health and the Environment, we're going to have Kendra Appelman-Eastvedt and Haley Gabbard talk about the really terrific program CDPHE has on offer. And they're both staff, everybody's a staffer with the agencies I've introduced you to, of course. And then with a really good session on tips for writing successful grants, we have Lisa Skumatz, who also has been recycling and consulting for probably 40 years, and is the president, of course, of CIRA, Skumatz Economic Research Associates, a very well established, well-respected consulting firm. So now we'll do the agenda, which is pretty straightforward. First, Melissa from EPA, then Kendra and Haley, CDPHE, then Lisa. And that should take us to about 3:40 p.m. That's what we've worked out. So we got about a little over an hour. Then we're going to take a 5-minute break because I don't know about you, but it's a long time to sit and look at a screen. And then we'll go into breakout rooms. And if you weren't aware of this, we're breaking out half urban and, well, not half, but parties who want to talk about things from an urban perspective, parties who want to talk about grants from a rural perspective. And the objective of those breakout rooms is really to look at what grant opportunities there are, share other opportunities that may not be mentioned by our speakers, and look at collaboration options if possible. So we're pretty excited, and so let's go ahead and get started. Melissa is the environmental scientist with EPA Region 8. She's the Pollution Prevention, Water Sense, and Safer Choice Coordinator. So please, Melissa, looking forward to this.
Thank you, Anne. Hopefully everyone can see and hear me okay. I am with the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. I'm really excited to be here this afternoon. I realize it's been a really long day. I'm going to try my best to not put anyone to sleep. I'm excited to talk to you about some of EPA's voluntary programs as well as some of our grant opportunities that we have. I know a lot of folks usually associate the EPA with a regulatory agency, you know, one that enforces laws, regulations, rules, and issues fines and does inspections. But what a lot of people don't realize is we also have voluntary programs. So I'm here to talk to you about that. Next slide, please. So first, who am I? I'm the Pollution Prevention, Water Sense, and Safer Choice Coordinator with EPA Region 8. I've been with the agency for about 22 years, so I've been with them for a really long time. Prior to this role, I was the Oil Spill Prevention and Oil Spill Response Coordinator. I did that for about 18 years. I did a lot of work with the regulatory community, a lot of oil inspections, very, very different programs. The programs I'm in now are around sustainability and providing funding and grants to states and tribes. Next slide, please. So like I said, I'm going to talk a little bit about our grant programs. A lot of folks, again, they don't realize that some of these opportunities are out there. So that means we have money that can be applicable to a lot of the organizations that are attending this summit. So I'm excited to talk about some of those today. And then I'm also going to touch on some of our other voluntary programs. Next slide, please. Just for reference, EPA is a national agency. There are 10 regions throughout the country. We are in EPA Region 8. So when I refer to Region 8, I am associating our jurisdiction with these 6 states. So we oversee Colorado, Utah, Wyoming, Montana, North Dakota, and South Dakota. So if there's a competitive grant that's out there, it's usually going to be competing within these 6 states. Next slide, please. Okay, so for the first grant programs I'm going to talk about, they're my programs. I'm going to talk a little bit about the Pollution Prevention Program and the Source Reduction Assistance Grant Program, but I did want to just talk about what pollution prevention is. It can be kind of a hard concept to grasp a little bit, even for me. So pollution prevention is any practice which reduces the amount of hazardous substance, pollutant, or contaminant entering the waste stream. And if you look to the right, you'll see the environmental protection hierarchy, and you'll notice that pollution prevention, aka source reduction, is at the very top. It's the most preferred method. And then underneath that is going to be reuse, recycling, treatment, and then of course the less preferred method is disposal into the landfills. So this is very similar and identical to the food waste hierarchy, which a lot of folks might be familiar with. Pollution prevention and source reduction are always at the top. This includes practices such as implementing energy and water conservation techniques at businesses. Some examples also include equipment or technology modification, process or procedure modifications, reformulation or design of products, substitution of raw materials, improvements in housekeeping, improvements in training, maintenance, and inventory control. Next slide, please. Okay, so I'm going to give you a little bit of history on the Pollution Prevention Grant Program. Basically, 30 years ago, Congress passed the Pollution Prevention Act of 1990. You know, they recognize that industry produces millions of tons of pollution annually, and they're spending billions of dollars on actually trying to control it. So they saw that there's significant opportunities to prevent pollution at the source, and they enacted the P2 Act. And so they basically stated that EPA must establish a source reduction program, and we're doing that through grants. So, which means we have funding available. And I think there's a lot of different agencies that are on here that are able to apply for this grant. So eligible applicants include state governments. We are long-term partners with CDPHE. They have a great program. You guys may know Lynette Myers and Derek Bohr. They are P2 champions. Universities, colleges, and federally recognized tribes are also eligible to apply. There's a pretty high statutory match. It's at 50%. So if an applicant proposes or comes in requesting, say, 200,000, they're going to have to match that at 50%. Projects must provide technical assistance to businesses on source reduction practices. And the range of awards is anywhere from 40,000 to 500,000, and this is over a 2-year grant period. The request for application is usually every other year. We just closed our last grant cycle, our FY 20 and 21 grant cycle just closed. So hopefully budget and everything passes, and we will post or publish another RFA sometime at the end of 21 or maybe the beginning of 22. I am the Region 8 contact for this program, so if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. Next slide, please. Okay, the next grant program that I wanted to highlight is our Source Reduction Assistance Program. It's almost identical as far as the definition goes as the P2 program. Again, proposals that come in under this grant program, they must address pollution prevention. However, it is a little bit more broad as far as eligibility goes. So folks who are eligible to apply to this grant include states, universities, and colleges, and tribal governments, as well as local governments, city or township governments, independent school district governments, nonprofit organizations, private institutions of higher education, and community-based grassroots organizations. Another difference is the match requirement. It's a lot lower than the P2 match requirement. It's only 5% instead of 50%. Again, projects must provide technical assistance, and this is a little bit broader. It also includes trades associations, communities, and local governments. The range of awards isn't as big as P2. They're around 20 to 260,000 over a 2-year grant period. The RFA for this grant also just closed. Again, hopefully budgets will pass and we will issue another RFA at the end of 21 or beginning of 2022. I'm also the Region 8 contact for this program, so if you have specific questions, feel free to reach out to me at any time. Next slide, please. So one thing that I wanted to just kind of touch on is our national emphasis areas. So applicants that come in, they can't just choose to work with any business that they choose or manufacturer that they choose. EPA established these national emphasis areas in order to help focus resources to generate a more impactful and measurable results. So grant projects just have to select at least one. And during the last grant cycle, we issued 5 different NEAs, and those manufacturers include food and beverage, chemical, automotive, aerospace, and metal. All of the applicants that applied during the last grant cycles, they chose to work with food and beverage manufacturers. So a lot of them are working with breweries and bakeries, as well as coffee roasters. We do have a number of different businesses in the RFA in the appendices, just for reference, and we go by the NAICS codes, the North American Industry Classification System. Next slide, please. I'm going to just put a quick plug in because that was my program. We're trying to do a lot more outreach and getting the word out about these grant and funding opportunities. If you're interested, please sign up for our regional email distribution list. You can email Bernice Peterson. She helps manage that. We also have a national P2 hub. They also send out a ton of information, webinar opportunities, training opportunities, and other funding opportunities around P2 and sustainability. So if you're interested in getting national news, feel free to reach out to our P2 hub, and the email address is there as well. Next slide, please. Okay, so just quick disclaimer, I'm going to talk about a few other grant opportunities that are not under my program, but I think they might be applicable to some of you, so I did just want to mention them. So the EPA has an environmental education program, and they also issue grants. Environmental education is a process that allows individuals to explore environmental issues, engage in problem solving, and take action to improve the environment. Eligible applicants include education agencies at the tribal, state, and local level, environmental agencies, colleges, universities, nonprofit organizations, and non-commercial educational broadcasting entities. Projects must, well, during the last grant cycle, projects needed to address ag, education, community projects, or career development. I don't know if that's going to be the same for the next grant cycle. It may or may not change. The match requirement is 25%, and they do issue their RFA, I think, on an annual basis, and it usually is published sometime in October. Wendy Dew is the Region 8 contact, so if you have questions, feel free to reach out to her. Next slide, please. Our environmental justice program, they also have grants, which means they also have funding available. Environmental justice is the fair treatment and meaningful involvement of all people, regardless of race, color, national origin, or income, with respect to development, implementation, and enforcement of environmental laws, regulations, and policies. Eligible applicants include community-based, local, tribal, and nonprofit organizations. There is no match requirement, and they issue two different types of grants. One is a collaborative problem-solving grant, and this is in the amount of around 130 every year, and I believe they only issue around one per region. They also issue around 5 small grants in the amount of $30,000. This is also published, I think, on an annual basis. And again, you can look for that grant opportunity sometime in October. Dan Heffernan is the contact if you have specific questions related to environmental justice. Okay, I'm going to talk a little bit about the EPA anaerobic digestion pilot grant. This is very, very new. It's under our materials management program. I think it's in its second year of issuing a grant. So hopefully, again, with budget, they'll do another one next year. Basically, this is to reduce food waste by expanding anaerobic digester capacity in the United States. So for those of you that aren't familiar, anaerobic digestion is a process used in waste management to break down organic materials such as food waste, scraps, manure, sewage, sludge that could otherwise contribute to methane emissions in landfills. Through this process, food waste gets a second useful life as renewable energy. Eligibility is to state governments, universities, federally recognized tribes, and nonprofit organizations. There's no match requirement for this opportunity either. The request for application, they just closed it. I was very fortunate and I was able to sit on this review panel. A lot of really good, exciting projects. I'm excited to see who's awarded. Hopefully they'll issue another one in the summer of 2021. The range of awards is around 50 to 300,000, and I believe that's in each region. Virginia Till, if you guys don't know her, she's our food waste or sustainable management of food contact. She is very well known, not just within Region 8, but nationally. Definitely reach out to her if you have questions on this grant. Okay, this is I just wanted to let you guys know we are not the only federal agency that offers funding opportunities. You know, the U.S. Department of Ag, DOE, Department of Congress, Department of Education, they all offer grant opportunities. The easiest way to probably find them, I would say, is to go to grants.gov, and there's a keyword. You can just kind of do a search for composting or farm to table or just whatever's going on in your community, and you want to look for funding opportunities. That's probably going to be the easiest way. Next slide, please. And I think we're ready for the poll question. Okay. So we are doing a quick poll. How can the EPA improve advertising and announcing future funding opportunities? It's multiple choice. You guys can go ahead and fill that out. It would help me out tremendously. Okay, it looks like it's pretty even. Email distribution list, presenting at conferences through local and state networks, and then posting on various platforms. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, I also just wanted to kind of touch base on some of the voluntary programs that EPA offers. Again, like I said, folks usually associate us with as a regulatory agency. These programs may not offer funding, but they do have a ton of resources and connections and can also establish partnerships with others that you guys may need to network with. So we have our Sustainable Materials Management, Patrick Wooders. He's kind of new. He actually took over Amanda Hong's position. She used to be the SMM coordinator. She actually moved on to the AIR program. But I believe he may have picked up some of the work that she was doing around construction and debris. So if you have questions, please reach out to Patrick. Virginia Till, I had already mentioned her. She is the Sustainable Management Food Coordinator. She's an excellent resource and again is known nationally. She has great connections. If you have any questions related to food waste, feel free to reach out to Virginia. Energy Star, Amanda Hong took this on along with the Indoor Air and Radon program. She's in the AIR program. A lot of folks don't realize that Energy Star is a government program because they did a really good job of branding it, but it is. So if you or a business that you know is trying to set up your Energy Star portfolio, please reach out to Amanda. I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with the Water Sense or Safer Choice programs. They are almost identical to Energy Star. We try to label products that are more efficient, so toilets, shower heads, faucets, aerators, etc. So Colorado is kind of ahead because we have I think there's a mandate that requires stores to actually only sell Water Sense label products, which is very exciting. Safer Choice, if you're not familiar, again, this is a label to look out for. We also label chemicals that are safer, not just for you, but also the environment. And then just another quick plug. I don't know how many of you guys are familiar with community-based social marketing, not to be confused with social media, because it's not. But this is a strategy for implementing behavior change, and it's not an EPA strategy. It's based off of a book by Doug Mackenzie Moore. And even though it's not an EPA strategy, a few of us have taken this training, and we definitely think it is a strategy that works. So we do offer free 2-hour workshops on folks who are trying to set up outreach campaigns. So if you're interested, please reach out to Virginia, myself, or Patrick. And I think we are actually going to just pass it back to Anne before doing questions to save on time. So thank you guys.
All right, thanks everybody. We do have time, looks like there aren't any questions. Let's move on to CDPHE's presentation. And please feel free to jot your questions down in the chat box or raise your hand. And also I just want to say everybody's going to be giving their emails in the presentation. And so if we really run out of time, do feel free to reach out to our speakers via their work emails. Next up, we have Kendra Appelman-Eastvedt, who's the CDPHE RREO Program Administrator. She's going to be telling you more about what RREO stands for if you don't know. And then also from CDPHE, Haley Rogers-Gabbard, who's managing the new Front Range Waste Diversion Grant Program. We're so fortunate to have 2 capable people and now 2 grant streams in the state now. So, ladies.
Great. Thank you, Anne. I realize that Haley and I failed to put our polling question slides in here, but would it be possible for us to, I think we wanted to do those sort of right out the gate. Can we start with those? I believe the first one was inquiring as to how many people that are viewing today have applied for our REO grants, Recycling Resource Economic Opportunity Grants.
I don't think we got the poll questions to the moderators in time, so I'm not sure.
Oh, I thought we had sent them. Okay, well, we won't do any poll questions then. We can talk about this all after. Okay. Well, thank you all for joining us today. Next slide, please. I want to talk a little bit about the different types of funding and support that we offer at the Department of Public Health and Environment. Just for a little footnote, these programs are housed in the Division of Environmental Health and Sustainability. And right now, specifically, they're under the Sustainability Unit in that division. Most of our funding and grant opportunities are released via what we call RFA, or Request for Applications. And they're run by our two grant programs, our REO, Recycling Resource Economic Opportunity, and our Forward, which we abbreviate FRWD grant programs. We have other initiatives that exist to help increase waste diversion, and we'll talk about those a little later in this presentation. Next slide, please. So let's take a look for a minute at some of the grant opportunities we offer. Because we publish the RFAs several times each year, our RFAs typically seek a relatively certain or specific focus area. Those might be infrastructure, in-market development projects, mini grants, etc. Starting in this fiscal year, we're offering grants under our newest program, which is the Forward program. And the first RFA for that particular program is going to be advancing communities up the zero waste ladder. In fact, that RFA just closed, and applications are being processed by the review team. The general, not quite yet. The general lineup historically has been infrastructure, with about $2 million a year from our REO, and market development. We do that typically every other year. This last year we did something wild and crazy and funded two phased projects. So they were funded over fiscal years 20 and 21. We do many grant projects as staffing and dollars are available, regional studies as needed, also municipal studies as needed. And new, thanks to Forward, we're going to have focused RFAs on the community zero waste that I just mentioned, as well as C&D, construction and demolition diversion. Next slide, please. So just real quick, here's a map to give you an idea of our REO projects that have been funded throughout the state. As another footnote, this data is available on our REO webpage. Well, it's now our Recycling Grants webpage. And there's a wealth of other information available there as well there. Next slide, please. So I wanted to touch on some specific projects that have been funded over time via our REO. This is a photo of a Denver project called Master Wash. It was an infrastructure grant financed or supported in fiscal year 17. And at last report, this particular project was able to divert 2 tons of scrap metal basically a month, where we expect that that's gone up over time. What they did was process used oil filters and kept those out of landfills, a super big landfill problem. And this project had a little bonus attached. They were also able to capture 180,000 gallons of used oil in the first year that's also recycled. Next slide, please. In fiscal year 17, as an in-market project, we awarded funds to the Fort Collins Conservation District to start a recycling twine program, or a twine recycling program. And while this deer looks kind of fancy, it's not a desired outcome of this particular form of waste. What we ended up doing was funding the project that is housed in the Waste Not recycling facility up in Johnstown. The program has now expanded across the state, and the first year they recycled just under 8 tons of this polypropylene twine product. In the meantime, many grants have also been funded to support expansion. And as a bonus, this particular project protects wildlife, especially birds of prey. Next slide, please. This picture depicts a fiscal year 19 mini grant for a C&D diversion company known as the National Center for Craftsmanship. Although it was a small dollar project, it supported the purchase of a new truck for this facility and allowed them to have dependable and safe C&D recycling in Denver, Larimer, Weld, and Routt counties. Next slide, please. So the REO program also supports free public drop-off centers for specific types of recycling. The application tends to change a little every year and is released in April for the previous calendar year. The primary goal of our rebate program is to help support transportation costs for our rural recyclers. Next slide, please. The REO program also is able to offer some technical assistance. So beginning in fiscal year 2019, we offered the Next Cycle program through Resource Recycling Systems to help develop cohorts of end market ideas. So basically these are teams that have an idea, and what the program does is help them to shore that idea up to develop a business plan, reach out to investors. We are now in fiscal year 2020 finishing up our second cohort. And due to COVID, we put off the pitch session, which is the big event that happens at the very end of the program, but it's going to take place at 1 p.m. on October 8th. And if everyone wants to mark their calendars and reach out to me, I'll be happy to get the information for you to sign up to attend. Next slide, please. One more thing that we do via our REO and Forward is studies. We fund them on a variety of topics. We've recently, via Senate Bill 20055, REO has been assigned a couple of research projects. One is to look for best practices for end market ideas throughout the United States and North America, as well as research to develop manufacturer responsibility or EPR processes, again, based on best practices throughout the state. So these two programs, or these two research projects, will investigate programs, not implement them, but get us some good standards to take a look at. In addition, we'll be conducting a statewide education campaign, again, via legislation, that will launch TV and radio ads throughout the state, as well as print materials throughout the state. Just because we don't want to leave Forward behind here, they're actually getting their first research project underway, which is going to be to examine data. And Haley, you may have to jump in. The data analysis is just for REO recycling. I think I didn't make a good note here. REO, not REO, statewide recycling diversion metrics.
Yeah, statewide
Okay.
diversion metrics.
Thanks. And with that, I will hand this over to Haley.
Next slide, please. Thank you. So we're going to take a look at some similarities and some differences between our two programs, REO and Forward, around a few different parameters. Next slide, please. So as you see, oversight for REO comes from PPAB, which is the Pollution Prevention Advisory Board, so Board of Directors, as well as CDPHE. And then together, they receive assistance from the Assistance Committee, which also acronym is PPAB-AC, so the Assistance Committee to the Pollution Prevention Advisory Board. It sounds like a lot going on there, but really those three entities kind of work in concert together to provide oversight for the program. The program is administered by staff at CDPHE, and they receive all their revenue from user fee at the landfills across the state. And in recent years, we're at about $4.3 million a year that we're giving out in grant funds. Next slide, please. So Forward has a little bit more autonomy than REO in that we're a type 1 board. That's a distinction that's made in statute. And we are also administered by CDPHE staff. The fees for Forward come only from landfills on the Front Range, so waste dumped at landfills in these 13 Front Range counties. And as you can see by the funding amount here, over time, in the later years of the enterprise and program, we're going to be poised to distribute larger amounts or larger grants with less restrictions than REO is. So we're working right now with REO to try to work out, what would be the best use of those funds given the growth in forward funds over the years and the less restrictions that we have on implementing those grant funds. Next slide, please. So I know you want to know a little bit more about Forward itself. We started in mid-2019 when the governor signed the bill into law. Since then, we have formed the board, 13-member board, and hired multiple staff members to implement the program. We've also developed a strategic plan. We've issued our first annual reports to the legislature. We have issued our first RFA, as Kendra mentioned, and closed that recently. We're in the evaluation stage for that. And then, as Kendra also talked about, we have this data survey out, which is to look at metrics and waste diversion metrics in Colorado and nationwide as well. Next slide. And that I'll just give you a minute to look over this timeline, but it's basically everything I just said with a little bit more details, but you can kind of see, everything that we've accomplished in this first year without actually having given out any grants yet. All right, and here is a map of forward counties. Just alphabetically for those in the region, that's Adams, Arapahoe, Boulder, Broomfield, Denver, Douglas, Elbert, El Paso, Larimer, Jefferson, Pueblo, Teller, and Weld. And so waste that is dumped at landfills in these 13 counties is subject to a fee. Next slide, please. So our first RFA focused on community zero waste, or really moving communities up the zero waste ladder. We recognize that we are trying to move communities around the state towards universal curbside pay-as-you-throw recycling programs. But we realize that not everybody is, some communities haven't even taken the first steps. And so what we want to do is make sure that we're able to be a resource and provide grant funds to communities who are both at the bottom rungs of that ladder and who maybe still only have a private hauler system, as for example, Aurora is pictured here. And then we also want to be available to the communities who are near, closer to the top of that ladder. Maybe they have universal curbside pay-as-you-throw recycling. They also have compost, but they want to site their own compost facility. So we're trying to move everybody up the ladder, no matter where they're starting from. We received several fantastic, exciting applications that fit that bill, and so we're very excited to announce the winners for our first RFA round later this fall. The grants for these were between $25,000 and $500,000. And they can be up to 2 years. So that's one of the restrictions I was talking about with REO, where they have to, they're restricted to spend those funds within 1 year, but Ford doesn't have that restriction. So we're able to fund more long-term projects. We are also planning to issue 2 RFAs next year. One around, the current plan is to issue one around C&D debris diversion, and then hopefully issue a second round of this zero waste ladder, or community zero waste RFA, that also adds an infrastructure and more dollars. But the board and the work groups are developing those plans right now that will determine which RFAs we put out next year. And with that, I will give it back to Kendra.
Thanks, Haley. So we'll just dive in a little bit more to the RREO program. Next slide, please. So these are sort of a snapshot of our grants through the ages, and I'll say the more recent ages. The first bar chart up on the upper left reflects the grant dollars that have been awarded between fiscal years 2014 and last fiscal year 2020. As you can see, there's been a little variation, with last year being our highest award year. The line graph with the red graph right below shows the number of projects funded, again, 2014 through 2020. If you'll notice, fiscal years 18 and 19, we had considerably more grants funded than other years. We had opportunities to fund many grants in both those years, so added an additional almost 30 grants in each of those years. I always like to say, though, it's quality, not quantity. So just because a year had few grants, it doesn't mean that the work being done wasn't still pretty amazing. The waste diverted yellow line graph shows tonnage, basically, as reported by our grantees over time, 2014 to 2019 in this case. If you'll notice, in fiscal year 16, we had a pretty high diversion amount. That was thanks to A1 Organics at the Heartland facility in Weld County. Some of you may recall that. Fiscal year 17, also a banner year. That was due to Momentum Glass Processing out at the Broomfield facility. Although 2020 isn't reflected on here, we're pretty excited about the totals we're going to have to report. We did support a project out in Cortez that does concrete and asphalt, basically grinding and recycling. And the first report received from them was over 58,000 tons diverted. So that's going to be a pretty significant project. And last but not least, the blue line graph at the bottom right, that represents jobs created by the RREO program, or the projects that we funded fiscal years 14 through 19. 2018 was by far our best year, and that was a year that we brought the food rescue project Food Maven online. And that was their initial development, where they hired quite a few people. So we were happy to be part of that. Next slide, please. And just to jump into a few more RREO projects over time, this is a fiscal year 19 infrastructure grant that we provided funds for the San Luis Valley Solid Waste Facility to add a green waste program. They also developed collection facilities for our twine recycling program in coordination with the Fort Collins Conservation District. That first year, they reported an additional 5.6 tons of diversion, specifically green waste, and 7.6 tons of that awful twine that is just everywhere across the rural parts of our state. Next slide, please. This is a mini grant project that we did in fiscal year 18 with the city of Durango, and we helped them update all of their recycling containers, but specifically with bear-proof containers to protect wildlife. Next slide, please. This was a fiscal year 19 grant infrastructure that we supported a recycling collection truck for the city of Cortez. This very sexy new model replaced a 26-year-old truck that was on its last leg. And as a result, we've saved that particular program scores of time and money. Next slide, please. And I mentioned Food Maven a little while ago in terms of jobs created. We funded projects for them in fiscal years 18 and 19, both infrastructure projects. They rescue food in a very unique way for donation and also for resale. They have facilities in Denver and in Colorado Springs. We're happy to have been part of their projects. And the first year, they reported over 587 tons of rescued food. Next slide, please. And this reflects a free public recycling drop-off site for Lake County. They were a rebate recipient this last year. And just to give a little bit of information about our rebate program. For fiscal year 20, we awarded 37 rebate applicants. And our total of dollars distributed through the rebate program was just under $690,000. And again, just as a reminder, this is for free public drop-offs. And we aim and actually create a rebate calculation that intends to help our rural recyclers support their free drop-off programs, and especially help with those expenses that they have to deal with for long hauling of their commodities. And I'd like to turn it back over to Haley.
we're going to wrap up our presentation talking about how to apply for CDPHE grants. So RREO and Forward both use Blackbaud as our online portal for grant applications. It was in the past called Gifts Online or Gifts, so you may have also seen those, but it's called Blackbaud now. This is also used for the evaluation of the applications and for contract monitoring, so everything stays within Blackbaud. The online portal is also our secure and tamper-proof system to be able to accept and process your applications, which really protects your application and means that no one here at the department can edit anything that you submitted. Next slide. You can access the portal in a few different ways, but you must create an account first, no matter what you do. So we give you links both to the application portal and to create an account, as well as to the RFA opportunity itself. And we give you those links both in the RFA, so in every RFA you're going to have access to both of those, and on our website too. Otherwise, the links are really specific and really, really long, and so we don't want to take up a whole page with those long URLs. So we try to make it easier for you and just provide the shortcuts. Next slide. And so this is what your portal homepage would look like once you've started a grant application. So you can see down there at the bottom, I've started a application for that Forward RFA that just closed. Otherwise, if you try to enter the portal through that RFA link, you're going to end up creating a new version of your application every time. So really, you're going to click that, start new application only one time, and then every other time to get back into Blackbaud, you're just going to go to the application portal link. Hopefully that makes sense. And then once you submit your application, you're going to get an email version of the application, and just make sure to save that in your files. Next slide, please. Go ahead, Kendra.
So for some tips just to help you be successful in not only getting your grant to us or your application to us, but in knowing what the timelines are. The first thing we recommend that you do is sign up for our listserv. That way you'll be among the first to know when we post an RFA. It's also a good idea just to check our websites, attend conferences and webinars like this, and don't be afraid to take a chance, fill out an application, and put your name in the hat. Do pay close attention to deadlines to make sure that our processes are equitable. We have to be very firm with the rules and the times and the dates. And we always recommend that you don't wait till the last few minutes to click submit. Never fails that that's the time that internets go down and things go badly. So just generally be prepared. We also host a written question and answer process. Some of our RFAs have 2 of those, some have 3. It's a really good idea, even if you aren't asking a question, to take a look at those, because you might find information that's helpful that you hadn't even thought to ask, or it might just guide you in your thought processes for filling out that application. It's important to know that when an RFA is open, or what we like to call on the street, that we can only accept your questions in writing. We can't chat with you. Other times, though, we're happy to have chats offline, answer questions, and do what we can to assist. Make sure that you answer the questions we ask, answer all of them, and try to limit the information that we don't ask for. Kind of stick to just the facts. If a scoring rubric is part of the RFA package, go ahead and take a look at that so that you understand how we're going to be evaluating your application. Be sure to submit your financial risk assessment questionnaire, also known as a FRAC. If you have issues with those, reach out to us. We can certainly either get you technical assistance, or if you need assistance from our internal audit folks in filling it out, we can put you in touch with them. Last but not least, if your application is declined, don't give up. Ask for feedback. We're happy to share review or evaluation notes with you. And we've had several applications that over time, kind of going back and forth with submitting them, have been approved. So sometimes it's a learning process and you can make it better each time. Next slide. And that was enough, but that's all for now. And again, if you have questions, if there's not an RFA that's open at the time, Haley and I or other members of our teams are happy to chat with you. And with that, we'll open it up for questions.
Actually, thanks so much, Kendra and Haley. We're going to hold questions.
Oh, that's right. Sorry.
No problem till the end. And this is a really good segue, the last points you made, Kendra, into Lisa's presentation. Lisa Skumatz of CIRA is going to give us basically a great quick how-to on writing successful grants. Thank you, Lisa. And thanks, ladies. Lisa, you're muted. And Emily, you might need to unmute. There we go.
Thank you. Thanks, Anne. Hello, Recycling Colorado, and I'm very pleased to be here at the summit. I'm going to be talking about tips for writing successful grants. Those will be grants that are useful tips for CDPHE grants, EPA grants, or other grants that you may identify. And talking about, is it hard or easy and what to prepare for? Next slide. I'll be covering the go, no-go decision and how to get organized, how to write the submittal, how to propose credible evaluation methods, how to prepare the supporting information that's required as part of grants, and then summarize that. You'll note that my slides are extremely, are extremely wordy, and that's because they're meant to stand alone as a resource at the end of this. And I wanted to say, why am I here? Why am I talking about this first? Because we've written a ton of grants and proposals for more than 30 years and proposed and won at the federal, local, all kinds of different levels. We've written grant requests and RFPs as well. So we also, and evaluated those. So we also understand kind of what goes into preparing them and how people go about scoring them and what they're looking for. Third, we've worn multiple hats. So I've previously been with a city, previously been with the feds, previously an elected official, previously with a utility, previously a nonprofit, and a consulting. So lots of different hats, so can really understand kind of where each entity that might be in the audience here, I hope, is coming from. And most important potentially is that we specialize in measurement and evaluation and hard to measure things. So what are some credible methods for the part that seems scariest to everybody, which is the how do we say what's going to happen out of our grant. Next slide. So next slide. There are two main types of grants. Some prescribe a topic and you're requesting a grant, and others have an open topic where you get to make up the proposal. Now remember that this is not free money. One of the things that's especially important to recognize that in many cases there are limitations around what you can patent, what you can keep secret as a business secret. And so if that's not going to suit the sort of thing you're looking for a grant for, you need to not apply for that grant. Very often those have to remain public, and that's really an important decision-making item for you. There are a variety of types of support that are provided, but very often operating is probably the hardest one to get grants for. And a number of sources were mentioned earlier in the presentation. A number of sources are also listed on this slide. Next slide. I want to tell you that the go, no-go decision is one of the most important things you have to worry about. It should be an explicit decision, and it's really vital. You should do some background research to try to figure out whether or not this grant makes sense for you. Look at their website. Who won? What kinds of topics were they talking about? Who are some of the pre-bid attendees? Was this sent out recently and it has a really close, and it didn't get sent directly to you, and it has a really short deadline? In that case, it might be kind of wired, and you might want to decide whether or not you really want to bid on that. Do you have a history with the granting agency, or do you want to have a history with the granting agency and at least get your name familiar to them? Realistically, you should assess the likely competition in a realistic way. Do a web search on the topic. Does your firm come up anywhere near there? Is there a competitive field where you're really far down the list? Might you, would they have a much better chance of winning? Or if you teamed with some of them, might you be able to increase your chances of winning? Understand the competition in a realistic way. And also, will this benefit you and especially will it benefit the granting agency as well? And can you live with those conditions on the results? Next slide. Is it doable and is it winnable by you? Can you afford to do it? Can you afford to do it for the budget that you think that they're looking for? Do you have resources in-house or do you need a team? Is it okay with your leadership? And is the proposal itself really onerous and really you don't have the time and staff available to do a good enough job to be credible? That's an explicit go, no-go decision. And if it's no realistically, then don't waste your time and don't waste the others. Find and pursue some better option that's better for your time. Next slide. Go only if it makes sense and don't waste your time or others. Next slide. How do you prepare? Well, first read the application carefully. I'd say at least 3 times. First, you're looking for your interest and whether it's suitable, whether you're eligible, etc. Second, what are the requirements, dates, and is it a big deal for submitting and can you handle that? Third, think carefully about strategically, what are your win points? What edge do you have over the competition? And then how are you going to get this organized so you can meet what they need? Next slide. When you're organizing this document, first do an outline and use their outline. Not because their outline is necessarily the best on earth, but because their outline is how they're looking for the points they're going to award you. So that is, over and over again, really important. Make an annotated outline, a checklist of what needs to be done, an initial schedule and assignments. Then have a teleconference with your internal team and discuss the competition, what do they think about the competition and maybe people you didn't know about, what are the win points, who should be doing what, and if teaming is advantageous. If it is, then you're going to need to reach out to that team, find out whether or not they're willing to provide you, to support you and be on your team, and you may need a follow-up call in-house to make sure that people understand that. Are there, at the same time, Q&A may be happening? Look at the Q&A answers. Is the team going to team with you or not? And then sort of reconfirm your go, no-go decision based on that information. Make sure you have the assignments and check-ins and schedule all set up and have one coordinator with authority. And then to do upfront, and it's not always the thing you think you should do upfront, but believe me, at the last minute, you are going to wish you did this upfront. Request the letters of support, references, and team letters of commitment. Prepare for logistics like signatures. Is somebody going to be gone on vacation that you need a signature from the day of the submittal? That is a real big pain. Do you need multiple copies? Who can deliver it? Don't leave budgeted forms for the end because, again, they usually need approvals. And don't assume that an online submittal is quick and easy because, oh my gosh, some of these systems are really tough. Practice with some easy form. Maybe they want an insurance form or some, letter of intent or something. Get something submitted so you see how it works and you're all set up. And then plan a last spell check that includes the optional checkbox of checking all capital letters because there's nothing worse than your title having a spelling error because spell check didn't check it. Next slide. I've got a number of sheets that are just resource only. This one talks about what you do in different sections. Next slide. This one talks about common terminology, objectives, strategies, outputs, all that jazz. Next slide. And maybe some things that you can organize via a table. Next slide. So how do you write this? Next slide. Well, the most important thing is you really need a powerful start. It's really important to get people on board with you and make it, and number one, make it easy for them to assign you points. That's here and everywhere in the submittal. Make your key points up front because that's where they can't miss it, and be clear and really succinct throughout. Tables are really useful for organizing quals, check marks for yes, we meet that, or who meets that, and for criteria and for key outcomes. Make sure you convey with passion. Don't write it in a real hands-off way. Make sure that they understand you really care about this as much as they care about this, and maybe more. And make sure that you emphasize their goals and their benefits and present outcomes and deliverables in things they care about, not that you care about. Next slide. Over and over again, remember, it's them, them. It is not you. And it's make it easy for them to award you points. Number one goal. Next slide. In organizing your story, you're going to want to think about, is it best chronologically or by an operational flow or whatever? Most cases I see it chronological tasks. And the bottom line is pick an organization and then stick to it. And then one way to maybe save yourself some space is maybe have your tasks organized as a one-sentence purpose, followed by discussion, and then maybe activities and deliverables in a side-by-side table that can save you some space. Next slide. When you're writing, number one, use that annotated outline and get to the section's point right away. Then you can talk more about it, but get to the point right away. Maybe express a need and how you're going to solve it. If you want kind of extra points, you might talk about the obstacles you might run into and how to solve those, how you're going to solve those obstacles. Don't forget their role. If they're meant to have some significant role in there, make sure it's clear about what they're going to be doing as well. And speak to the reviewers. The reviewers aren't always experts, and that's not a bad thing. They can't be experts in everything. They're not experts in your thing, so avoid jargon, and remember that their technical level may differ from yours. And don't start in the middle of a story, bring them along with you. On look and feel, I think the most important thing is, underline, bold, color, emphasize something so that your main points stand out and that the evaluation criteria stand out, and try to make something of visual interest on nearly every page so that their eye is drawn to the next thing. Oh, what's the next interesting thing? The next interesting thing. Make every table stand on its own and use short, active, energy-laden paragraphs. Next slide. Get to the point, have visual interest on every page. Next slide. Another resource is, how do you speak to academics? How do you speak to grant people? And for grant people, it's usually direct, selling, accessible language, easily understood, value. Next slide. Do you have writer's block? That's a common concern. Well, you can write in any order and paste it back together. What I usually find helps me is either think I'm giving a speech or do it like I'm explaining it to a friend. Most importantly, I find for me is I get tied up in these fine points. I'm writing and writing, and then there's all this whole thing that I need to explain. You don't need to explain it there. Put a little footnote, put down there what you want to explain, and go back to that later and make sure you get the main points out, not all these fine points. Don't get lost in those. At the end, you may go back and write the footnotes, or you may decide they weren't really that critical anyway, and you didn't waste all that time. So that's one suggestion that works for me. Shorter is good. No one hates you for being succinct. Next slide. Start wherever you can. Next slide. If a resource about space constraints, if you're running up against problems with space, there are a number of suggestions about how you can, if they allow it, if they don't prescribe everything, then you can compress by picking a different font. Arial Narrow is your smallest. Compress letters and also spacing between sentences. All that can really save you a lot of space. You can also know that avoid passive tense. It's 30% longer than the active tense. So there you've just saved yourself a lot. And this provides a lot of suggestions about how to avoid getting caught in extra words and passive tone that takes up too much space. Next slide. The document isn't just write it and send it and then wait. It is write it, then jazz it up so that people want to read it, and then finish it up and send it. Jazz it up by style, passion, and make it ability. And I give you suggestions on how to get that with the star. And you
Lisa, it seems as though your internet might be frozen. I don't know if anyone else is having the same problem, but Lisa is frozen on my screen.
Yes, mine as well.
Me too. If folks could put a note in chat so we know who's getting what.
She just left. I think she's gonna.
Here she is.
Oh, here she's coming back. Oh,
Oh,
you're
now
on.
you're muted.
Wait, you can hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So I'm looking for the evaluation slide. Next slide. Next slide. Thanks. So here what's important is don't punt. Don't say, oh, they want some measurement. I'm just going to skip past that. Maybe they won't notice it. No. Even if they don't ask for it, often evaluate, showing that you care about measuring what the impacts of your strategy are or your grant is important and can get you extra points. So what you're going to want to do is measure the benefits of the program, and it doesn't have to be perfect. You just have to show that you tried, that you understand it's important and you're thinking about it, that you recognize that there's value from your project and you're dying to show them how valuable that is, and also that, you know, remember that during your project you can come up with better and better measurements as you're moving forward. Remember that you need a baseline. What would have happened without your program? And that only comparisons are really useful. You know, what would have happened and then what your program added, what your program changed. You want to set up metrics and data collection for things beyond tonnage. I mean, tonnage is one thing, but it's not the only thing. It might be greenhouse gas, it might be jobs, it might be percent participation, might be dollars per impact, might be return on investment, percent awareness, behaviors, and a whole host of other things. Don't forget that you can do repeated measurements so you can show progress over time and what your program added. And data collection may not be only you. You might bring in partners specifically related to helping you with data collection. That might be haulers, volunteers, or other things like that. Don't think you have to do everything. Partners can be useful for that as well. I want to mention that there's sample sizes have some sort of magic numbers. And one of the things that the magic numbers are 68, 96, 270, and 368. Those four numbers are numbers to remember, because if you have at least 68 surveys, for instance, you're talking a statistically significant survey. It's plus or minus 10% with 90% confidence. You don't have to have hundreds. You can have hundreds, and that's even better, but 68 is kind of a minimum one. You know, you don't want to go below 30. 30 is where you only start to get towards large number properties. So 68, if you can show 68 surveys or 68 measurements or something like that, then you're starting to have real credibility. Note also that web surveys are really cheap these days, and you should think about whether you need to do participant, non-participant surveys, PNP, participants and non-participants. If you want to measure impacts, a pre and a post is good. What was the impact? What was it before you started the project? What was it after? Better is pre-post with the control group. So pre and post for the people who did participate in your program or did have your drop-off or whatever, and pre and post for an area that didn't have that same program but is similar in some way. Then you do the difference of those two differences, pre-post and pre-post. You may want to consider also looking at time a bit later and looking at retention of that change or benefit from your program. Best is a quantification of a triple bottom line where you're looking at economic, environmental, and social metrics. We've done a lot of work in that area, and in some cases we've been using specialized techniques to measure it. And we noted that a project that had a negative benefit cost, we turned it into with looking at the social elements, it turned into a 4-to-1 benefit cost ratio. So it can really make a difference. Next slide. I want to remember that you may not have to measure all the data directly through your program. You can use secondary data and bring that in as well. So you may pair it up with, you know, information from WARM or ICLEI or census or waste characterizations from other places or EPA's report on solid waste in the US or other towns or things like that. You don't have to measure everything. You don't have to be the source of everything, but you can go ahead and measure that. For net, let's see, I think the last thing is, you know, clearly design and describe your measurement sources and how your success will be ID'd. Next slide. And these are just some examples of how evaluations might look. Next slide. Next slide, that's a resource. Next slide. So on this slide, I just want to say for the qualifications, you know, start with something you've got from another project or resumes or whatever, and then I would suggest handing it off to somebody who's less critical and have them work on this. Don't spend your time. If you've got, you know, tell them what you need, get them something close enough to start with, and then let them finish it up. Give them a list of the main objectives, main changes, and then move on to the next one. Next slide. Same thing with management and staffing. Maybe draw what you want for the staffing plan or whatever, then hand it off to somebody else and have them finish it up, because it can be very time consuming. And these are the kind of things you're going to want to include in that. Main thing being, who are the clear roles on who is doing what they're going to get for their money. Avoid bait and switch. Next slide. In the next slide, it's about budgeting. Excel, there's nothing to substitute for Excel. Don't do it at the end, because you may find in a very quick review of what your costs are going to be, oh my gosh, you may have written a whole set of tasks that now cannot be afforded by your budget. So you need to do this at least a very high level early on to make sure your task complexity is about right. And make sure who and what they're going to get for their dollars, clearly identify the matching and so on. Next slide. Schedule is not that hard. Gantt in an Excel chart can be really easily done. Or if you're really stuck for space, you can sometimes put that schedule at the bottom of the budget by each task. Say that task starts and ends, starts and ends, starts and ends. And then it takes up 2 lines of your report, depending on what they're really looking for. So can be complex, can be pretty simple, and still meet the requirements. Next slide. Next slide. In summary, there are a number of main things. One, the perspective is what they get out of it, not what you get out of it. You know, and consider letters of support to show that even others get out of it as well. 2, make it really easy for them to give you points. That's really vital. And follow the instructions exactly, because they're very often written in a way to be able to throw out proposals that don't meet those criteria. Not in a mean way, but they just have to manage their workload. Show the evaluation criteria and how you meet and exceed them. Next slide. 3rd, make it very readable, very active, very energetic, and use their terminology, stay brief. 4, make sure you have an evaluation so you can prove it. Why is your study worth it? Why? It gets you a lot more points if you do something other than just hand wave at it. And make sure that you remember those magic numbers. It's not that hard. Do something, do the best you can. And 5, consider things like transferability, toolkits, how you're going to disseminate the results, and make sure that's reflected. And while you're waiting after you submit it, maybe work contacts, but only if that's appropriate and only if that's allowed. And consider a grant writer or a grant reader or somebody to review your document to make sure it's really does speak to people other than the inside click. Next slide. In broad summary, follow the instructions exactly. Put yourself in their shoes. You're selling to someone else, not to you. Go, no go should be an explicit decision, and you should really consider the conditions and your competitiveness. Organize it up front, be succinct, energetic, and in their benefits. Edit, 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 spell check, and really review it carefully. Do something about measurable results, data collection. Don't punt on that. And if you lose, ask for a debrief. Remember, you're building a relationship. Next time you submit a grant to them, they will have heard your name before. You won't be a stranger. And learn and leverage. You have just written pieces that you're going to be able to use in the next grant or the next proposal, and you've just saved yourself a lot of time for that next one. So it's not a lose. And if you win, celebrate. Wins are worth celebrating. They take a minute and enjoy it. Next slide. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Lisa. I've seen her cover this in a 4-hour seminar. And so you get a prize for them packing so much info. These slides, am I correct, Emily and Allie? These slides will be available. There are more slides after this, the thanks one, where Lisa has provided more resources for you. And so I feel like we're covering both sides of the great grant story. We have time for about a 3-minute break. If anybody needs a little bio break or whatever, and then at let's see, what did we say? At 3:45, oh, you got a 2-minute break. I'm not gonna leave. We're gonna go into our breakout rooms. And I hope you noted questions you might have for Lisa. So thank you again to everybody. Yeah, the meeting recording will be sent to everybody. Will the PowerPoint itself be made available, Emily? Because
no, the PowerPoint slides were not going to be made available, just the recordings, but I'm sure if you reached out to Lisa, yeah, she would be happy to share. And then when everyone gets back from their very quick bio break, you should see a little pop-up on your screen that will ask you to join a breakout room. If you just hit yes once we're back, then we will all be in breakout rooms. Thank you.
All right, I am gonna.
If anyone is still sitting by their computer, if you could just type into the chat box what breakout room you would prefer to be in. The breakout rooms will be based on geographies, so either urban geography or a rural geography. It looks like that I'm not able to see what people's selections were. So if you could just put those in the chat box, then I'll get you all assigned. Thank you. Again, if people are just getting back from your bio break, if you can just please type into the chat box what breakout room you would like to attend. They're based on geography, so if you could just either type in urban or rural based on your geography and what conversation you would like to join, that would be super helpful.